The safe deposit box my aunt left me contained only a flash drive. The key trembled in my hand as I turned it in the safe deposit box for the first time. 3 weeks had passed since Aunt Caroline's funeral, 3 weeks of listening to my family whisper about how I'd finally gotten what I deserved, practically nothing. Box 247, the bank employee had said when I presented the small brass key Caroline had left me. My Uncle Richard had inherited the $12.3 million estate, the family pharmaceutical company, and the sprawling Victorian mansion in Beacon Hill. My cousins got trust funds worth more than most people see in a lifetime. And me? Maya Chen, the family disappointment, got a safe deposit box that cost $200 a year to maintain. The metal drawer slid out with a soft scrape that echoed in the sterile vault room. Inside sat a single item, a black USB flash drive, no bigger than my thumb, with a piece of masking tape wrapped around it. In Caroline's familiar handwriting, 2 words were scrawled across the tape, for Maya. I stared at it, fighting back the familiar sting of tears. Even Richard's 16-year-old daughter had inherited more than this, a vintage Cartier watch collection worth at least 50 grand. But here I sat, holding what looked like a piece of office supplies you could buy at Staples for $10. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Did you finally clean out that box? Richard says the bank called about the annual fee coming due. Of course he knew about the fee. Richard seemed to know everything about everyone's business, especially mine. He'd been the one to convince the family that I was too impulsive and financially irresponsible to be trusted with real money after I dropped out of business school to become a graphic designer. Never mind that I'd been supporting myself just fine for 4 years in my Cambridge apartment, paying my own bills and building a decent client base. To them, I was still the screw-up who'd disappointed the family by choosing art over accounting. I pocketed the flash drive and signed the paperwork to close the box. The February wind cut through my thrift store coat as I walked to my car, and I couldn't help but think about Richard's heated garage where he kept his collection of vintage Mercedes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd convinced everyone I was bad with money had somehow convinced my dying aunt to change her will 6 months before she passed. Back in my apartment, I made coffee and stared at the flash drive on my kitchen table. My laptop hummed to life, and I plugged it in, expecting maybe some old family photos or a heartfelt goodbye message. Caroline had always been the one person who understood me, who didn't make me feel like a failure for choosing my own path. The drive contained a single folder labeled insurance policy, with dozens of audio files dated over the past 2 years. My heart rate picked up as I clicked on the most recent one, dated just 3 days before Caroline's death. Richard's voice filled my apartment, crystal clear. The new medication adjustment should speed things along. Dr. Peterson doesn't need to know we're increasing the dosage. My blood turned to ice. I recognized the second voice immediately, my cousin Janet, Richard's eldest daughter. Are you sure about this, Dad? What if someone finds out? Who's going to question it? I have power of attorney, and everyone knows Caroline's been declining. Besides, once she's gone and Maya's out of the picture completely, everything will be exactly where it belongs. I ripped the earbuds out, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. The words echoed in my head, speed things along, increasing the dosage. They weren't just talking about inheritance. They were talking about murder. I forced myself to put the earbuds back in and continue listening. Maya's been sniffing around more lately, Janet's voice continued. She visited Aunt Caroline 4 times last week. I'm handling Maya, Richard replied, his tone cold and calculated. I've already planted the seed with your mother about Maya's concerning behavior. Started mentioning how she's been asking suspicious questions about Caroline's medications, acting erratic during visits. When the time comes, if anyone asks questions, the family will remember Maya as the unstable one who was obsessing over Caroline's medical care. My stomach lurched. Those concerning behavior comments had already started working. Just last week, my cousin Derek had asked if I was doing okay because his mom had mentioned I seemed fixated on Aunt Caroline's health. I thought it was normal family concern, but Richard had been systematically poisoning them against me, making me look like the suspicious one. I scrolled through more files, my cursor hovering over one dated 8 months ago. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. Who was Richard talking to in the middle of the night? The Hartwell account transfer went through. Richard was saying to someone I didn't recognize. Another $340,000 moved to the offshore holdings. Caroline's cognitive decline makes the timing perfect. Even if she notices discrepancies, no one will believe her. A woman's voice responded, what about the audit trail? Maya works in design, but she's not stupid. If she inherits any portion of the company, she won't inherit anything. Richard cut her off. I'm handling the will situation. Caroline's been receptive to suggestions about Maya's character lately. The medication adjustments make her more agreeable, easier to influence. By the time I'm done, Maya will be lucky to get Caroline's jewelry box. I didn't even get the jewelry box. My laptop screen blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I kept clicking through files. There were dozens of them, recorded phone calls, in-person conversations, meetings. Richard had been embezzling from the family pharmaceutical company for at least 2 years, using Caroline's declining health as cover. But worse than the theft was the systematic character assassination he'd orchestrated against me. I found a recording from 13 months ago that made my blood boil. Maya's always been jealous of the family's success, Richard was telling someone. It sounded like my Uncle Paul. Caroline feels sorry for her, but that girl has always been manipulative. Remember when she dropped out of business school? Caroline blamed herself, thought she hadn't been supportive enough. Maya's been using that guilt to influence Caroline against the rest of us. None of that was true. I dropped out because I was miserable, and Caroline had been the only one who supported my decision to pursue graphic design. But I could hear Paul agreeing, buying into Richard's narrative completely. Another file, dated 6 months ago. I'm worried Maya might try to contest the will, Richard was saying to his lawyer. I recognized the voice of Thomas Brennan, the family's attorney. We need to make sure the mental competency documentation is airtight. If Maya can prove Caroline wasn't of sound mind when she changed the will, the medical records support diminished capacity, Brennan replied. But Richard, if there's any evidence that you influenced those medical decisions. There won't be, Richard said firmly. Maya's the only one who might cause problems, and by then, she'll have bigger concerns than money. What the hell did that mean? I scrolled deeper into the files, my coffee growing cold as the horror unfolded. There were recordings I hadn't noticed before, buried in a subfolder labeled Maya Evidence. My name on a folder filled me with dread, but I clicked it open. The first file was dated just 5 weeks ago. Richard's voice was talking to someone I didn't recognize. Maya's been asking the wrong questions about Caroline's medical care. Yesterday she cornered Dr. Peterson in the hospital parking lot, wanting to know why Caroline seemed so disoriented during her last visit. What did Peterson tell her? The other voice was gravelly, unfamiliar. Nothing useful, but Maya's not stupid. She's starting to connect dots. I need you to handle the prescription records at Westfield Pharmacy, make sure there's no trace of the dosage modifications. And I want Maya's movements monitored. If she gets too close to the truth. I understand. My skin crawled. Richard had been watching me? I thought back to the past few weeks. Had I noticed anything strange? That black sedan parked across from my apartment building for several days. The man in the coffee shop who seemed to be eavesdropping on my phone calls. Jesus, how paranoid was Richard? I clicked on another file from 3 weeks ago, just days after Caroline's funeral. Maya took the bait with a safe deposit box, Richard was saying to Janet. She looked so pathetic at the reading, trying not to cry when Brennan handed her that little key. The whole family was watching, probably feeling sorry for her. What's actually in the box? Janet asked. Nothing important. Some old photos, maybe a few pieces of Caroline's costume jewelry. I made sure anything valuable was moved to the estate inventory months ago. Maya can have her sentimental trinkets, it'll keep her busy and make the family think Caroline left her something meaningful. But Caroline had left me something meaningful. She'd left me the truth. I found a recording that made my heart stop. It was dated 2 months ago, and I could hear Caroline's voice in the background, weak, confused, but unmistakably her. I want to make sure Maya is taken care of, she was saying. She's been so good to me, visiting every day, helping with my medications. Of course, Caroline, Richard's voice was smooth, patronizing. But you know Maya has been acting strangely lately. Even the nursing staff has noticed. Yesterday she was arguing with them about your medication schedule, claiming they were giving you too much. Dr. Peterson is concerned about her behavior. Maya was arguing? Caroline sounded confused. That doesn't sound like her. The stress is getting to her, Richard continued. Perhaps it would be better if Maya took a step back from your medical care. Let the professionals handle it. And Caroline, about the will revisions we discussed, leaving Maya the pharmaceutical company shares might not be wise if she's becoming unstable. I don't remember her being unstable, Caroline said weakly. The medication makes it hard to remember things clearly, Richard replied gently. Trust me, Caroline. I'm looking out for everyone's best interests, including Maya's. Sometimes the kindest thing is to protect someone from responsibilities they can't handle. I was sobbing now, my laptop keyboard blurring through my tears. Caroline had wanted to leave me part of the company. She'd wanted to take care of me. But Richard had manipulated her weakened state, twisted her perceptions, made her doubt her own memories of who I was. My phone rang, making me jump. Richard's name flashed on the screen. I stared at Richard's name on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. The phone kept ringing, each buzz making my heart pound harder. What if he knew I'd found the flash drive? What if whoever had been watching me had reported back? On the 4th ring, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello? Maya, sweetheart. Richard's voice was warm, concerned, the same tone he'd used to manipulate Caroline. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I managed, quickly minimizing the audio files on my laptop screen as if he could see through the phone. I know Caroline's passing has been hard on all of us, but I worry about you especially. You were so close to her. There was something probing in his voice. I hope you're not dwelling on those final weeks. You know how confused she was near the end. My grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean? Well, some of the things she said, the nursing staff mentioned she was making some pretty wild accusations about her medication being tampered with. Paranoid delusions are common with her condition. He paused. She didn't say anything like that to you, did she? The bastard was fishing, trying to figure out what I knew. No, I lied. Nothing like that. Good, good. I'd hate for you to have those kinds of memories of her. Caroline loved you very much, you know. Even when she was worried about your recent behavior. My behavior? I echoed, even though I'd just heard him orchestrating this exact conversation in the recordings. The hospital staff mentioned you seemed quite agitated during your visits. Questioning the doctors, challenging the nurses about medication schedules. Caroline was concerned you were under too much stress. His voice carried that practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. In fact, that's part of why I'm calling. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. The family's been talking, and we think it might be good for you to get away for a while. Clear your head. I've spoken with your mother, and we'd like to pay for you to take a vacation, maybe a month in Europe. You always wanted to see the art museums in Florence. A month in Europe. Far away from Boston, from the family business, from any investigation I might want to pursue. That's generous, I said carefully. You've been through a lot. And honestly, Maya, some of the family members are concerned about your mental state. Your cousin Lisa mentioned you seemed paranoid at the funeral, talking about people watching you. I had mentioned that to Lisa. I'd felt exposed at the service, like everyone was staring at me, judging me for my cheap dress and my tears. Now I realized someone probably had been watching me, on Richard's orders. I wasn't paranoid, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Of course not, sweetheart. But grief can play tricks on our minds. The important thing is getting you healthy again. What do you say about that vacation? Through my window, I spotted a dark blue sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there an hour ago. The driver was reading a newspaper, but something about the way he held it seemed staged. I need to think about it, I said. Don't think too long, Richard replied, and for just a moment, the warmth dropped from his voice. Sometimes opportunities like this don't last forever. After I hung up, I sat staring at the sedan. Richard wasn't just offering me a vacation, he was trying to get me out of town before I could cause problems. The question was, what would happen if I refused to go? I opened another audio file, this one dated just 2 weeks after Caroline's death. Richard was talking to the same gravelly-voiced man. Maya's becoming a liability. If she keeps digging into Caroline's medical records. We can handle Maya, the man replied. Same way we handled the Peterson situation. My blood ran cold. Dr. Peterson? I grabbed my phone and searched for his name. The obituary popped up immediately. Dr. James Peterson, beloved family physician, died unexpectedly in a car accident last Thursday. Last Thursday. 3 days ago. Dr. Peterson was dead. The man who could have confirmed Richard's medication tampering, who might have had records of the dosage changes, gone. According to the article, his car had veered off Route 2 during Tuesday night's rainstorm, hitting a tree at high speed. No other vehicles involved. No witnesses. I scrolled through more recordings with shaking fingers, searching for any mention of Peterson. There, a file from 6 days ago, 2 days before the accident. Peterson's getting cold feet, Richard was saying to his gravelly-voiced accomplice. He's asking too many questions about Caroline's final prescriptions. Wants to review the dosage modifications we made. I can arrange a meeting with him, came the reply. Somewhere private where we can discuss his concerns. No meetings. Too risky. Peterson's the type who might wear a wire. Richard's voice was ice cold. Handle it like we discussed. Make it look routine, bad weather, slick roads, driver error. These things happen. The recording cut off, but my mind was reeling. They'd killed Dr. Peterson. Made it look like an accident. And now Richard was trying to send me away before I could ask the same dangerous questions. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, carolinasinsurance@protonmail.com. Maya. Asterisk if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found my insurance policy. I'm sorry for the burden I'm placing on you, but you're the only one I trust, asterisk. Asterisk Richard has been poisoning me slowly for months. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to make me confused, compliant. The recordings are my proof, but they're also your protection. As long as you have copies in multiple locations, you're safer, asterisk. Asterisk I've been documenting everything since I started suspecting. The flash drive has 3 sets of files, the recordings you found, financial documents proving Richard's embezzlement, hidden partition, password Mayastrong 2023, and a signed confession I recorded before I became too weak, asterisk. Asterisk Richard thinks he's eliminated all the evidence, but I've been planning this for months. There's a second safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown, box 891. The key is taped under the drawer of my jewelry box, the one in my bedroom that Richard thinks contains nothing valuable. That box has hard copies of everything plus additional recordings, asterisk. Asterisk don't trust the family lawyer, Thomas Brennan. He's been helping Richard. Don't trust the police yet either, Richard has connections there through his pharmaceutical company contracts, asterisk. Asterisk trust Sarah Martinez at Channel 5 Investigative News. I've been feeding her anonymous tips about pharmaceutical company corruption for months. She doesn't know it's about our family yet, but she'll listen to you. Her direct email is smartinez.tips@wcbb.com, asterisk. Asterisk you were always the strongest one, Maya. The only one who couldn't be bought or manipulated. That's why Richard worked so hard to turn everyone against you. That's why I knew you had to be the one to stop him, asterisk. Asterisk get the evidence to Sarah, then disappear until the story breaks. Richard is more dangerous than you know, asterisk. All my love. And Caroline. I read the email 3 times, my heart hammering. Caroline had planned this entire thing, right down to making sure I'd be the one to inherit her evidence. She'd known Richard would try to silence anyone who discovered the truth. The blue sedan was still outside my window. I grabbed my phone and called the number for First National Bank, checking their hours. They closed at 6 p.m., I had 43 minutes. But first, I needed to get to Caroline's house and retrieve that second key. The house that Richard now owned. The house where he was probably expecting me to eventually show up, looking for sentimental keepsakes. I copied the flash drive contents to 3 separate backup drives, then uploaded everything to a cloud storage account I created under a fake name. If something happened to me, at least the evidence would survive. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, asterisk Richard mentioned you seemed upset during your call. Are you taking care of yourself? The family is worried, asterisk. The family is worried. More like Richard was worried and using my mother to gather intelligence. I texted back, asterisk I'm fine. Thinking about that Europe trip Richard suggested, asterisk. The response came immediately, asterisk oh good. He'll be so relieved. You should call him back tonight and accept, asterisk. Tonight. Richard wanted an answer tonight, which meant whatever he was planning, it was happening soon. I looked out at the sedan again. The man was still there, still pretending to read his newspaper in the growing darkness. I had less than an hour to get to Caroline's house, find that key, and make it to the bank before closing. After that, I'd have to decide whether to run or fight. Caroline had chosen me to stop Richard. But first, I had to survive long enough to expose the truth. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the back exit of my apartment building, avoiding the front entrance where sedan man might see me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds as I pulled out of the parking garage. Caroline's house was only 15 minutes away in normal traffic, but I took a circuitous route through Cambridge, doubling back twice to make sure I wasn't being followed. The Victorian mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing warmly. Richard was home. I parked 3 blocks away and walked, keeping to the shadows between streetlights. My breath came out in white puffs in the February cold, and I pulled my hood up, grateful for the early darkness of winter. The side gate that led to Caroline's garden was still broken, the latch she'd been meaning to fix for months. I slipped through, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. The garden was overgrown with dead winter roses, providing perfect cover as I crept toward the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Richard at the dining room table, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear. By tomorrow morning, he was saying. I don't care what it costs. Maya needs to be handled before she becomes a bigger problem. I crouched lower, straining to hear more, but he'd moved away from the window. The master bedroom where Caroline's jewelry box sat was on the 2nd floor, accessible through the fire escape Richard had installed after Caroline's mobility started declining. She'd given me the key months ago when I'd been helping with her physical therapy appointments. The fire escape creaked softly under my weight, but the sound was masked by the wind rattling the old windows. Caroline's bedroom window was unlocked. She'd never gotten used to securing it after the fire escape installation. I slipped inside, immediately hit by the scent of Caroline's lavender perfume. Her bedroom looked exactly the same, as if Richard couldn't bear to disturb it yet. Or more likely, he hadn't bothered with the room he considered worthless. The jewelry box sat on her vanity, an ornate wooden piece that had belonged to her grandmother. My fingers fumbled as I tilted it forward, feeling along the bottom of the drawer. There, a small brass key taped exactly where Caroline had said it would be. As I peeled away the tape, voices drifted up from downstairs. Richard was talking to someone new. She's not at her apartment, an unfamiliar voice was saying, gravelly, like the man from the recordings. Martinez says she left through the back exit around 4:30. Martinez. The man watching me had a name now. Check her usual places, Richard replied. That coffee shop on Mass Avenue, the art supply store in Harvard Square. She has to be planning something. People don't just disappear after inheriting safety deposit boxes. My blood turned to ice. They knew about the safe deposit box. Which meant they probably knew about the flash drive. What if she already found what Caroline left her? The gravelly voice asked. Then we moved to plan B, Richard said coldly. Make it look like Maya had a breakdown. Grief-stricken young woman, family history of mental instability, recent erratic behavior. These things happen after traumatic losses. I pressed myself against Caroline's bedroom wall, the key clutched so tightly in my palm it was cutting into my skin. They were planning to kill me and make it look like suicide. The Martinez girl at Channel 5 has been sniffing around pharmaceutical companies lately, the gravelly voice continued. If Maya tries to contact her, Sarah Martinez won't be a problem much longer, Richard interrupted. I'm meeting with her news director tomorrow morning. Amazing how quickly investigative reporters get reassigned when their station's parent company depends on pharmaceutical advertising revenue. They were neutralizing Sarah too. Caroline's plan was falling apart before I'd even had a chance to execute it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Caroline's room. I dove behind the bed, pressing myself flat against the floor as the door opened. Make sure you check her jewelry box, Richard was saying to someone, probably his gravelly voiced accomplice. Caroline was sentimental. If she left Maya instructions, that's where they'd be. The footsteps approached the vanity where I'd just been standing. I held my breath, the key pressed against my chest, praying they wouldn't notice the disturbed tape on the drawer bottom. Box looks untouched, the man reported after what felt like an eternity. Good. Maya's probably still trying to figure out what's on that flash drive. Richard's voice was moving away. We'll give her until midnight to surface. After that, Martinez takes care of the situation permanently. The footsteps retreated, but I stayed frozen behind the bed for another 10 minutes before I dared to move. When I finally crawled to the window, both men were gone, but I could see Richard's Mercedes still in the driveway. I had 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to get to the bank, retrieve Caroline's backup evidence, and figure out how to stay alive long enough to expose the truth. The fire escape seemed impossibly loud as I climbed down, every creak echoing like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. As I reached the ground, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, we know you were here, Maya. Stop running and this can end quietly, asterisk. They'd been watching the house. Probably watching me right now. I ran. I sprinted through Caroline's neighborhood, my breath forming desperate clouds in the frigid air. Every shadow looked like a pursuer, every parked car a potential threat. The key to safe deposit box 891 felt like it was burning through my jacket pocket. First National Bank was 12 blocks away, and I had 37 minutes before they closed. But more importantly, I had less than 6 hours before Richard's midnight deadline. Whatever Martinez takes care of the situation permanently meant, I didn't want to find out. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, asterisk, your mother is worried sick. Come home and we can talk, asterisk. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if I wasn't running for my life. I turned off my phone entirely, pulled out the battery, and tossed both pieces into different storm drains. If they were tracking me electronically, that connection was severed now. The bank's parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived, gasping and sweating despite the February cold. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over marble floors, and I tried to look casual as I approached the customer service desk. I need to access a safe deposit box, I told the clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who probably wondered why I looked like I'd been running from something. Of course. Box number and identification? Box 891. I handed over my driver's license, praying Caroline had somehow arranged access for me. The woman typed into her computer, frowning slightly. I see here that you're listed as an authorized user, added just 6 weeks ago. Ms. Chen, I'm sorry for your loss. Ms. Caroline spoke very highly of you when she came in to update the access permissions. 6 weeks ago. Caroline had been planning this even as Richard was poisoning her, even as her mind was becoming clouded by whatever he'd been putting in her medication. She'd been 3 steps ahead of everyone. The vault felt colder than the winter air outside. Box 891 was larger than the first one, and when the clerk left me alone with it, my hands shook as I turned the key. Inside were manila envelopes labeled with dates, a leather-bound journal, and a second flash drive wrapped in tissue paper. But what made my knees nearly give out was the thick folder labeled Maya's Real Inheritance. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were legal documents transferring 51% ownership of Chin Family Pharmaceuticals to me, signed and notarized just 2 months before Caroline's death. The date was 3 days before Richard had convinced her to change her will. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the documents. Asterisk Maya, these transfers were completed before Richard started the heavy medication schedule. Dr. Peterson witnessed my signature and confirmed my mental state was sound. This makes you the majority owner of the family company. Richard has been embezzling from a business you legally own. Love, Caroline, asterisk. Dr. Peterson. The doctor who died in that convenient accident 3 days ago. The one witness who could have testified to Caroline's mental competency when she made these transfers. But the documents were notarized. Legal. Binding. I was not only Caroline's intended heir, I was the rightful owner of the entire family empire. Richard had stolen my inheritance and killed the doctor who could prove it. The leather journal was filled with Caroline's handwriting, growing shakier as the entries progressed. The final entry, dated just 4 days before her death, was barely legible. Asterisk can barely hold pen steady. Richard increased something again, hands won't stop shaking. Told him I wanted to see Maya, but he said she's too unstable, 4 visits now. Made me sign paper about medical power of attorney expansion, but words kept swimming. Feel like I'm disappearing piece by piece. If something happens to me, it wasn't natural. Richard has been asking about my heart medication schedule. Keeps suggesting I need stronger doses for breakthrough symptoms. No breakthrough symptoms. He's planning something final, asterisk. Asterisk Maya, if you're reading this, I tried to stay alive long enough to tell you the truth in person. The company is yours. The money is yours. More importantly, you are the good one. The strong one. The one who can't be corrupted. Stop Richard before he destroys other families like he destroyed ours, asterisk. Tears blurred my vision as I photographed every document, every page of the journal, every file on the second flash drive. This wasn't just evidence of embezzlement and manipulation anymore. This was proof of my uncle murdering my aunt to steal what legally belonged to me. As I packed everything back into the envelope, my reflection caught in the polished surface of the safe deposit box. I looked different. Harder. Like someone who'd finally understood the game being played around her. The bank clerk locked up the box for me, and I walked out into the darkness carrying enough evidence to destroy Richard completely. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I spotted a familiar dark sedan pulling into the parking lot. Martinez had found me. I ducked behind a parked car as the gravelly-voiced man stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. She's here, he was saying. Just came out of First National. You want me to grab her now? Richard's voice was faint but audible through the phone, not in public. Follow her. Wait for a better opportunity. I crept between parked cars, staying low, my mind racing. I had the evidence to expose Richard, but I needed to survive long enough to get it to someone who could act on it. Sarah Martinez at Channel 5 was compromised, the police couldn't be trusted, and my own family would never believe me over Richard. But there was one person Richard couldn't control. One person who had the power to bring down the entire conspiracy with a single phone call. Thomas Brennan's wife, Jennifer, worked for the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. She handled white-collar crime prosecutions and had access to resources Richard couldn't touch. More importantly, she'd never liked her husband's involvement with our family's business affairs. I had 4 hours until Richard's midnight deadline. Time enough to make one very important call. I crouched behind the parked car, watching Martinez scan the bank parking lot through his rearview mirror. My phone was dead in 2 separate storm drains, which meant I needed to find another way to contact Jennifer Brennan at the Attorney General's office. The public library on State Street was 6 blocks away, open until 9 p.m. If I could make it there without Martinez following me, I could use their computers to send everything to Jennifer's secure email. But first, I had to lose my tail. I waited until Martinez stepped out of his sedan, then sprinted toward the T-station entrance. The Red Line platform was crowded with evening commuters, perfect cover. I bought a Charlie card with cash and caught the first train that arrived, heading toward Park Street instead of my usual route home. At Park Street, I switched to the Green Line, then doubled back on the Blue Line toward Government Center. Basic evasion tactics I'd learned from watching too many spy movies, but they seemed to work. By the time I emerged at State Street, there was no sign of Martinez or his sedan. The Boston Public Library's research floor was nearly empty, just a few graduate students and one homeless man using the computers for warmth. I chose a terminal in the back corner and logged into a new email account I created with a fake name. Jennifer Brennan's email address was listed on the Attorney General's website, j.brennan@mass.gov. I attached photos of every document from Caroline's safe deposit box, uploaded the audio files to a secure file-sharing service, and began typing the most important email of my life. Ms. Brennan. Asterisk my name is Maya Chin. You may know my family through your husband Thomas's legal work for our pharmaceutical company. I'm writing to report multiple felonies including embezzlement, elder abuse, and murder asterisk. Asterisk my uncle Richard Chen has been systematically poisoning my aunt Caroline Chen while stealing from Chen family pharmaceuticals. I have recorded evidence of him tampering with her medication to accelerate her death, plus financial records showing over $2.3 million in fraudulent transfers to offshore accounts asterisk. Asterisk more critically, I have proof that Dr. James Peterson was murdered 3 days ago to prevent him from testifying about Caroline's medication records. The car accident was staged by Richard's associates asterisk. Asterisk I am the legal majority owner of Chen Family Pharmaceuticals, documents attached. Richard has stolen my inheritance and is now planning to kill me to prevent exposure. I have less than 4 hours before they execute their plan asterisk. Asterisk please review the attached evidence immediately. I am going underground until I hear from your office asterisk. Maya Chen. Phone, destroyed for security. Location, withheld. I hit send and immediately began uploading backup copies to every major news outlet I could think of. Channel 7, the Boston Globe, the Herald, even CNN's tip line. If Jennifer couldn't act fast enough, maybe media pressure would force Richard into the open. As I worked, a news alert popped up on the computer screen that made my blood freeze. Breaking, prominent Boston doctor's death under investigation after anonymous tip. I clicked the link. Channel 5's website showed a brief story about Dr. Peterson's accident being reclassified as a homicide investigation after someone had called in evidence of foul play. The story was bylined by Sarah Martinez. My heart pounded. Someone else was investigating Peterson's death. But who had called in that tip? Then I noticed the timestamp on the article, posted just 47 minutes ago. Right around the time I'd been in the safe deposit box reading Caroline's journal entry about Peterson. I scrolled down to the comments section, and my breath caught. One comment, posted anonymously 15 minutes ago, simply read, check Chen Family Pharmaceuticals. Follow the money. Someone was helping me. Someone else knew about Richard's crimes and was feeding information to Sarah Martinez despite Richard's attempts to silence her. My reflection in the computer monitor showed a face I barely recognized, determined, focused, dangerous. Richard had spent 2 years systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, my inheritance. He'd murdered Caroline and Dr. Peterson to cover his tracks. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the black sheep of the family. I printed copies of every document, stuffed them into my jacket, and cleared the computer's browser history. Outside, the February wind cut through downtown Boston like a blade, but I barely felt the cold. Jennifer Brennan would need time to review the evidence and coordinate with other agencies. The media investigation was just beginning. But I had Caroline's journal, the recorded confessions, and legal proof that I owned the company Richard had been looting. I also had something Richard didn't expect. I was done running. It was time to call him back. I found a payphone outside the library, one of the few left in downtown Boston, and dialed Richard's number using quarters I'd scrounged from my jacket pockets. He answered on the first ring. Maya. His voice was tight with controlled anger. We've been looking for you. I know. I kept my voice steady, channeling the newfound steel I discovered in Caroline's safe deposit box. We need to talk. Yes, we do. Your behavior today has been very concerning. Breaking into Caroline's house, accessing bank accounts that don't belong to you. He was fishing, trying to figure out exactly what I'd found. The house belongs to you now, I said carefully. But the bank accounts? Those are more complicated than you think. A pause. When Richard spoke again, his tone had shifted to something colder. What did Caroline leave you, Maya? Photos. Some jewelry. Sentimental things. I fed him the lie smoothly. But Richard, I found something else while I was there. Something I think you need to see. What kind of something? I took a deep breath, committing to the most dangerous gamble of my life. Letters. Hidden in her jewelry box. Love letters between Caroline and Dr. Peterson, dated from the past 6 months. Apparently they were having an affair. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. That's impossible. Peterson was married. Caroline was barely lucid in her final months. The letters suggest otherwise. They're explicit. And they mention concerns Peterson had about Caroline's medication schedule. About someone tampering with her prescriptions. I let that hang in the air. Richard, if these letters surfaced during Peterson's homicide investigation. Homicide investigation? His surprise sounded genuine. Peterson died in a car accident. Not according to Channel 5 News. Sarah Martinez is reporting it as a murder case now. Someone called in an anonymous tip. I gripped the payphone receiver tighter. Richard, if the police find out Peterson was questioning Caroline's medical care right before he died, and then they read these love letters discussing medication tampering. Where are these letters now? Richard's voice had gone completely flat. Safe. But Richard, I'm scared. If someone killed Peterson to keep him quiet about Caroline's medication, and I have evidence of what Peterson knew. I let my voice shake slightly. What if they come after me next? Another long pause. Maya, listen to me very carefully. Those letters, if they really exist, they're dangerous. Not just to the family's reputation, but to you personally. If Peterson's killer thinks you have evidence. That's why I'm calling. I need protection. I need help figuring out what to do. Of course. Of course, sweetheart. Where are you now? I almost smiled at how quickly he'd taken the bait. Richard thought I'd stumbled onto evidence of Peterson's murder without realizing Richard was the killer. He thought I was still the naive, frightened niece who needed his guidance. I'm downtown. I've been walking around for hours, too scared to go home. What if someone's watching my apartment? They might be, Richard said, his voice full of fake concern. Maya, I want you to meet me somewhere safe. Somewhere we can talk privately about these letters and figure out how to protect you. Where? The old pharmaceutical warehouse on Northern Avenue. Building 47, it's been empty since we moved operations to Cambridge last year. No one will think to look for you there, and we can examine these letters together, decide how to handle them safely. Building 47. I knew it well. I'd done some graphic design work for the company's moving notices 2 years ago. It was isolated, surrounded by other empty warehouses, with no security cameras or witnesses. The perfect place to make someone disappear. I don't know, Richard. It sounds so isolated. That's what makes it safe, he pressed. Maya, if someone really did kill Peterson, and they think you have evidence, then public places aren't safe anymore. You need somewhere completely private until we can get you proper protection. What about the police? Shouldn't we call them? Not yet. Those letters could implicate Caroline in Peterson's death if they suggest she knew someone was trying to hurt him. We need to read them first, understand what we're dealing with. Richard's manipulation was masterful. He was making me complicit in covering up evidence while thinking I was protecting Caroline's memory. Okay, I said finally. Building 47. When? 1 hour. There's a side entrance on the east wall, door 3B. It'll be unlocked. Maya? His voice softened with false warmth. Everything's going to be fine. Uncle Richard will take care of you. The line went dead. I hung up the payphone and checked my watch, 8:43 p.m. In exactly 1 hour, I'd be walking into a trap that Richard thought would end with my death and the permanent burial of Caroline's evidence. But Richard didn't know about Jennifer Brennan's email, or the backup files I'd sent to every news outlet in Boston, or the fact that I now knew I legally owned the company he'd been stealing from. Most importantly, Richard didn't know that the scared, naive Maya he'd spent 2 years destroying was gone forever. I had 1 hour to prepare for war. I walked through downtown Boston with purpose now, no longer the hunted animal I'd been an hour ago. Richard expected to meet a terrified niece clutching love letters that didn't exist. Instead, he'd face someone who knew exactly what he'd done and had the evidence to prove it. But first, I needed backup that couldn't be silenced or bought. The Massachusetts State Police Barracks on Leverett Circle was a 15-minute walk from the library. I googled their tip line while researching Jennifer Brennan's contact information. More importantly, state police operated independently of the Boston connections Richard might have through his pharmaceutical contracts. The desk sergeant looked up as I approached, probably wondering why a young woman in a thrift store coat was walking into a police station at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I need to report multiple homicides, I said without preamble. And I have evidence that another murder is planned for tonight. That got his attention. Within 5 minutes, I was sitting across from Detective Carmen Reyes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story. I showed her photos of Caroline's journal entries, played audio clips on the library's tablet I'd borrowed, and explained Richard's trap at the warehouse. Ms. Chen, Detective Reyes said carefully, these are serious allegations. But if your uncle is as dangerous as you claim, why are you planning to meet him? Why not let us arrest him based on this evidence? Because the recordings alone might not hold up in court without corroborating witnesses, and Richard's already eliminated Dr. Peterson. But if I can get him to confess while wearing a wire. I met her eyes steadily. He thinks I'm bringing him evidence he can destroy. Instead, I'll be recording him admitting to murder. Detective Reyes studied the documents spread across her desk. The financial crimes are clear-cut, these bank records show obvious embezzlement. And the medication tampering. She picked up a photo of Caroline's journal. This handwriting analysis alone could support elder abuse charges. But proving he killed Dr. Peterson will be harder. Not if he confesses tonight thinking he's about to eliminate the last witness. It's too dangerous. We can pick him up now, work with the DA to build a case. And then what? I interrupted. Richard's smart. He's been planning this for 2 years. Without a confession, his lawyers will claim Caroline was mentally incompetent when she wrote those journal entries. They'll say the medication changes were legitimate medical decisions. They'll make it look like a greedy niece trying to overturn a valid will with forged documents. Detective Reyes frowned but didn't argue. We both knew how easily expensive lawyers could muddy clear evidence. Besides, I continued, Richard told me to come alone, but he never said I couldn't have backup waiting outside. If I don't walk out of that warehouse in 30 minutes, you'll have probable cause for immediate arrest. She was quiet for a long moment, then opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small recording device no bigger than a button. This is against my better judgment, but you're right about needing a confession. This transmits to our surveillance van, we'll be able to hear everything in real time. As she helped me tape the device inside my jacket collar, Detective Reyes's expression was grim. Ms. Chen, if your uncle is willing to kill his own sister and a family doctor, he won't hesitate to hurt you. At the first sign of danger. I'll run, I promised. But detective, you need to understand something. Richard destroyed my relationship with my family, stole my inheritance, and murdered the person I loved most in this world. Running away means he wins everything. At 9:47 p.m., I stood outside Building 47 on Northern Avenue, staring at the dark windows of the abandoned pharmaceutical warehouse. Detective Reyes and her team were positioned in unmarked vehicles around the perimeter, close enough to respond quickly but far enough away to avoid detection. The side entrance was unlocked as promised. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of empty shelves and shipping containers, lit only by security lighting that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. My footsteps echoed in the vast space as I made my way toward the office area where Richard would likely be waiting. I found him in what used to be the quality control lab, sitting calmly at a metal table with his hands folded. He looked older than I remembered, his silver hair reflecting the harsh fluorescent light overhead. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, predatory. Maya, he said warmly, standing to embrace me like the loving uncle he'd never actually been. I was so worried about you. This has been such a difficult day. I'm sorry I ran, I said, letting him hug me while the wire recorded everything. I was scared. When I found those letters. Of course you were scared. Anyone would be. Richard guided me to a chair across from his. Now, show me what Caroline left you. These letters you mentioned. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the recording device as I pulled out a manila envelope I'd filled with blank papers at the library. Richard, before I show you these, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. Were you really surprised when Caroline changed her will? You two had been so close, and she always said she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I let my voice trail off, watching his face carefully. Richard's expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. Maya, Caroline did want to take care of you. But in her final months, she was so confused. The medication made it hard for her to think clearly, and she started having paranoid thoughts about the family, about money, about people trying to hurt her. Paranoid thoughts, I repeated, my heart pounding. But what if they weren't paranoid? What if someone really was trying to hurt her? What do you mean? Richard's voice sharpened slightly, but he kept his expression concerned. Maya, you're starting to sound like Caroline did in those final weeks. These conspiracy theories. I'm not talking about theories. I pulled out one of the blank papers, pretending to study it. Richard, this letter from Dr. Peterson to Caroline, he mentions being worried about someone changing her medication without his knowledge. He says he found discrepancies in the pharmacy records. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the paper in my hands. May I see it? In a minute. But Richard, there's something else. I met his gaze directly. Peterson writes about meeting with Caroline the night before he died. He was going to help her document the medication tampering. He even mentions recording their conversation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard's face went completely still. Recording? According to this letter, Caroline had been secretly recording conversations for months. Peterson encouraged her to keep documenting everything. I watched Richard's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Richard, what if Caroline left me more than just letters? What if she left me recordings? That's... Richard cleared his throat, his composure slipping for the first time. Caroline was paranoid, Maya. Elderly people with cognitive decline often imagine conspiracies. They think people are plotting against them when they're just trying to help. But what if she wasn't imagining it? I pressed, still holding the fake letter. What if someone really was manipulating her medication? What if Peterson died because he was going to expose the truth? Richard stood abruptly, beginning to pace behind his chair. Maya, you need to stop this line of thinking. It's dangerous. If you go around making wild accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm just trying to understand what Peterson meant when he wrote about offshore bank accounts. I pulled out another blank paper. This second letter mentioned specific amounts, $340,000 transferred in March, another $180,000 in May. Peterson thought someone was embezzling from the pharmaceutical company while Caroline was too confused to notice. Richard stopped pacing. His face had gone completely white. Those are very specific numbers, he said quietly. Peterson was thorough. He documented everything before he... I let my voice break slightly. Richard, I'm scared. What if whoever killed Peterson thinks I have evidence about these bank transfers? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken threats. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. Maya, where exactly did you find these letters? Hidden in Caroline's jewelry box, just like I told you. But Richard. I stood up, clutching the fake papers to my chest. I think there might be more. Caroline's letter mentions a safe deposit box with recordings. What if she documented everything Peterson suspected? Richard's eyes were completely cold now, calculating. What safe deposit box? I don't know yet. But Peterson's letter mentions box 891 at First National. He writes about helping Caroline store evidence there. I took a step backward, letting fear creep into my voice. Richard, what if the police find those recordings during their homicide investigation? There won't be any recordings, Richard said flatly. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Richard realized what he'd just revealed and took a step toward me, his mask finally slipping completely. Maya, he said softly, you've always been too smart for your own good. Behind him, I could see the warehouse's main entrance opening silently. Detective Reyes and two uniformed officers crept inside, moving through the shadows between shipping containers. I just needed to keep Richard talking for 30 more seconds. Smart enough to figure out what you did to Caroline, I said, backing toward the emergency exit. Smart enough to know you killed Peterson. Smart enough to get yourself killed, Richard finished, pulling a gun from his jacket. The gun looked enormous in the fluorescent light, black metal gleaming as Richard pointed it at my chest. My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to keep talking, knowing Detective Reyes needed more time to get into position. You're going to shoot me in an abandoned warehouse? I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. That's your plan? Grief-stricken young woman, overwhelmed by family tragedy, takes her own life in the same building where she used to visit her beloved aunt at work. Richard's voice was completely calm now, like he was discussing the weather. Very tragic. Very believable. The police won't buy it. I don't own a gun. You will tonight. This particular weapon was registered to Caroline 3 years ago for home protection. She reported it stolen 8 months ago, right around the time her medication started affecting her memory. Richard smiled coldly. Amazing how confused elderly people can get about where they put things. My blood chilled. He'd been planning this for months, stealing Caroline's gun and creating a paper trail that would make my death look like suicide using a weapon she'd lost. But something didn't add up. If you were going to frame me for suicide, why meet me here at all? Why not just break into my apartment and stage it there? Because you claim to have letters that don't exist, Maya. Because you mentioned recordings and safe deposit boxes and offshore accounts with very specific dollar amounts that you shouldn't know. Richard's eyes narrowed. Where did you really get those numbers? I clutched the blank papers tighter, my mind racing. Through the warehouse windows, I could see more police vehicles arriving silently, their lights dark. I told you, Peterson's letters to Caroline. James Peterson never wrote any letters to Caroline. I would know, I was monitoring all her communications. Richard took another step closer. Those bank transfer amounts, the dates, the account numbers, that information exists in exactly one place. Caroline's safe deposit box at Cambridge Trust, which I had cleaned out 3 months ago. My heart stopped. You already found Caroline's evidence? I found a box full of financial documents and paranoid ramblings from a dying woman. All safely destroyed. Richard's smile was triumphant. So I'll ask you again, Maya, where did you get those numbers? The recording device felt hot against my collar as I realized the scope of Richard's planning. He'd found Caroline's first safe deposit box months ago, the one she'd been using before she got truly suspicious. But he didn't know about box 891 at First National, the one she'd opened later with the real evidence. Caroline told me, I said desperately. Before she died, she was lucid for a few minutes and she told me about the money transfers. Caroline barely recognized her own name in those final weeks. The morphine dosage alone would have made coherent conversation impossible. Richard raised the gun higher. Stop lying to me, Maya. Who else knows what you know? Behind Richard, I could see Detective Reyes moving between the shipping containers, maybe 20 feet away now. I just needed to keep him talking, keep him focused on me instead of watching the shadows. No one else knows, I said, letting desperation creep into my voice. Richard, please. I won't tell anyone about the money. I don't even care about the inheritance anymore. I just want. You want justice for Caroline, Richard interrupted. You want to destroy me for taking what should have been yours. You want to prove you were right about me all along. His finger moved to the trigger. Unfortunately, Maya, you've always wanted things you can't have. The warehouse lights suddenly blazed to full brightness as Detective Reyes shouted, Boston Police. Drop your weapon. Richard spun around, still holding the gun, his face twisted with rage and panic. In that split second, I dove behind a metal shipping container as 3 things happened simultaneously. Richard fired at Detective Reyes, she returned fire, and every police officer in the warehouse converged on our position with weapons drawn. The gunshots echoed through the empty building like thunder. When the noise stopped, Richard was on the ground, clutching his shoulder and screaming about his rights, while Detective Reyes kicked Caroline's stolen gun across the concrete floor. Maya. Detective Reyes called out. Are you hurt? I stood up on shaking legs, my ears ringing from the gunfire. I'm okay. Did you get everything? She held up a small receiver connected to my wire. Every word. Including his confession to murdering Dr. Peterson and stealing evidence from your aunt's safe deposit box. Her expression was grim as she watched paramedics treat Richard's shoulder wound. Maya, there's something else. We got a call 20 minutes ago from the Attorney General's office. They've frozen all Chin family pharmaceutical accounts pending investigation. Richard looked up from the stretcher where paramedics were working on him, his face pale but his eyes still full of hate. This won't stick, he snarled at me. Expensive lawyers, Maya. I'll be out in 6 months, and when I am. Actually, Detective Reyes interrupted, you'll be interested to know that we executed search warrants on your home, office, and personal bank accounts while you were busy confessing to murder. We found quite a bit of interesting evidence, including communication with Marcus Torres, the man you hired to kill Dr. Peterson. Richard's face went completely white. I want a lawyer. Too late for that conversation, Detective Reyes replied. You should have thought about lawyers before you decided to confess everything to a wire. As they wheeled Richard away in handcuffs, I stood in the empty warehouse surrounded by police tape and evidence markers, holding Caroline's fake letters that had just helped solve her murder. My phone, a new one Detective Reyes had given me, buzzed with a text from Jennifer Brennan at the Attorney General's office. * Maya, we need to meet tomorrow morning. You have a company to run. *. A company to run. The thought should have been overwhelming, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Real, legitimate power to make things right. Richard had spent 2 years destroying my life, convinced that I was weak, naive, controllable. He'd never imagined that the black sheep he'd created would become the wolf that brought down his entire empire. The next morning, I sat in Jennifer Brennan's office at the Massachusetts Attorney General's building, watching her review stack after stack of evidence spread across her conference table. She'd been quiet for nearly an hour, occasionally making notes or asking me to clarify details about specific recordings. Maya, she said finally, looking up from Caroline's journal, this is the most comprehensive documentation of elder abuse and corporate fraud I've seen in 15 years of prosecution. Your aunt was remarkably thorough. She knew Richard would try to discredit anything she left behind, I replied, accepting the coffee her assistant had brought. She had to make it bulletproof. Jennifer nodded, then pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. There's something else we discovered during last night's search warrants. Richard wasn't working alone in the embezzlement scheme. She opened the folder to reveal bank statements and email printouts. Your cousin Janet and her husband Michael were moving money through their consulting firm. They'd been taking a 15% cut of everything Richard stole. My stomach dropped. Janet had always been Richard's favorite daughter, but I'd hoped she was just following his lead, not actively participating in murder and theft. How much are we talking about? Over the past 2 years? Nearly $3.8 million diverted from company accounts. Jennifer's expression was grim. But here's what's interesting, the email trail suggests Janet was getting nervous about the scope of the crimes. 3 weeks ago, she sent her father a message saying she wanted out of the Peterson situation. She handed me a printed email dated February 15th, just 2 days before Dr. Peterson's death. Janet had written, Dad, I agreed to help with the financial transfers, not whatever you're planning with the doctor. This has gone too far. Michael and I want out, *. Richard's response was chilling, * too late for cold feet, sweetheart. We're all in this together now. Peterson will be handled cleanly, and then we can focus on the Maya problem. Stay calm and stick to the plan, *. The Maya problem, I repeated, staring at my own name in Richard's email. He was already planning to kill me 3 weeks ago. It appears so. And Janet. Jennifer pulled out another document. She's been cooperating with our investigation since we arrested her at 6 a.m. this morning. She's provided additional recordings of conversations with her father, including detailed plans for making your death look like suicide. The room felt cold despite the February sun streaming through the windows. What kind of details? Richard had researched your daily routines, your favorite coffee shop, the route you take jogging. He'd even identified which bridge you'd supposedly jump from after leaving a suicide note about being overwhelmed by grief and family financial pressures. Jennifer's voice was steady, but I could see anger in her eyes. Maya, your uncle spent months planning your murder with the same methodical approach he used to kill Caroline. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. The scope of Richard's conspiracy was more extensive than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about inheritance or money, he'd orchestrated the systematic destruction of his entire family. There's more, Jennifer continued. Janet also provided information about Richard's relationship with Marcus Torres, the man who staged Dr. Peterson's accident. Torres has been arrested in Connecticut, and he's already talking in exchange for a plea deal. According to Torres, Richard paid him $50,000 to eliminate Peterson, with another $75,000 promised after your death. $75,000. That's what my life was worth to Uncle Richard. The good news, Jennifer said, is that we have enough evidence to ensure Richard never sees freedom again. Murder conspiracy, elder abuse, embezzlement, witness tampering, he's looking at life in prison without parole. She opened another folder, this one containing legal documents with my name prominently displayed. The better news is that as of this morning, you are officially the majority owner of Chin Family Pharmaceuticals. All fraudulent transfers have been reversed, and the company's assets are being returned to your control. I stared at the papers, still struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been the family disappointment working as a freelance graphic designer. Now I owned a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical company and held the power to determine my family's future. What happens to Janet and Michael? I asked. That partly depends on you. As the primary victim of their crimes, your input will influence their plea negotiations. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. Janet is facing 8 to 10 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Michael could get 5 to 7 years. But if you're willing to support reduced sentences in exchange for their full cooperation. I thought about Janet, who used to babysit me when we were kids, who taught me how to braid friendship bracelets and sneak extra cookies from Caroline's kitchen. Richard had corrupted her, drawn her into his web of greed and violence. But she'd also participated in planning my murder. I need time to think about it, I said finally. Jennifer nodded. Of course. But Maya, there's one more thing we need to discuss. Running a pharmaceutical company requires immediate decisions about ongoing operations, employee payroll, pending contracts. Are you prepared to take control, or do you want us to recommend a temporary management company? Outside her office window, Boston Harbor sparkled in the morning sun. Somewhere in this city, my mother was probably reading news reports about Richard's arrest, trying to understand how the brother she trusted had deceived everyone. My cousins were waking up to discover their father was a murderer and their inheritance was built on blood money. The old Maya would have felt overwhelmed, would have asked someone else to make these decisions. But Caroline hadn't left her empire to the old Maya. She'd entrusted it to someone strong enough to expose the truth and rebuild what Richard had destroyed. I'm ready, I said, reaching for the ownership documents. Let's get started. 3 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Chin Family Pharmaceuticals, looking out at the faces of executives who had once dismissed me as Richard's irresponsible niece. The mahogany table gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and I could feel the weight of Caroline's presence in every decision I made. The Q2 financial reports show we've recovered 78% of the embezzled funds, my new CFO, Patricia Wong, was saying. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands have been fully liquidated, and the Swiss banks are cooperating with the federal investigation. I nodded, making notes on my tablet. Running a pharmaceutical company had been a steep learning curve, but Caroline's meticulous records had included detailed operational notes, almost like she'd been preparing me to take over long before her death. What's the status on the Peterson research project? That's complicated, said Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, our head of research and development. She'd been one of Dr. Peterson's closest colleagues before his murder. We discovered that Richard had been deliberately sabotaging James's breakthrough work on early-stage Alzheimer's treatments. The formula James died trying to protect could potentially help millions of patients. My pen stopped moving. Sabotaging how? Redirecting funding to fake research projects, corrupting clinical trial data, even stealing James's notes and selling them to competing pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Morrison's voice was tight with anger. Richard made over $400,000 selling James's proprietary research to Hartwell Industries while simultaneously convincing our board that the Alzheimer's project wasn't profitable. The room fell silent. I looked around the table at executives who had worked under Richard for years, wondering how many of them had suspected the scope of his betrayal. Dr. Morrison, I want you to restart Peterson's research immediately. Whatever resources you need, funding, personnel, equipment, it's approved. Maya, interrupted David Chen, my father's cousin and the company's former VP of operations, that's a $12 million investment with no guarantee of results. Perhaps we should take a more conservative approach while the company stabilizes. I met his eyes across the polished table. David had been one of Richard's strongest supporters, had publicly questioned my competency during the transition. David, Dr. Peterson died trying to protect research that could help Alzheimer's patients. My uncle sold that research to competitors and used the money to buy vintage cars. Which approach sounds more conservative to you? Several executives shifted uncomfortably. David's face reddened, but he didn't respond. Furthermore, I continued, pulling up a document on my tablet. Our legal team has identified $1.8 million in questionable consulting fees paid to David's firm over the past 18 months. Fees that were approved by Richard without board oversight. I looked directly at David. I'm sure it's just an oversight, but we'll need detailed documentation of services rendered for each payment. David went pale. Maya, I can explain those fees. I'm sure you can. Patricia, please schedule a forensic audit of all consulting contracts approved in the last 2 years. I want to know exactly where every dollar went and why. As the meeting continued, I felt Caroline's strength flowing through me. Richard had corrupted this company from the inside, turning it into his personal bank account while destroying legitimate research that could save lives. But piece by piece, I was rebuilding what he'd torn down. After the executives filed out, Patricia lingered behind. Maya, there's something else. We've received a settlement offer from Hartwell Industries regarding the stolen research. They're offering $2.3 million to avoid litigation. I smiled, thinking of Dr. Peterson's dedication to his Alzheimer's patients. Counter with $8 million and a public apology admitting they purchased stolen intellectual property. If they refuse, we take them to court and expose everything. Caroline had trusted me to be strong enough for this fight. I was just getting started. 6 months after Richard's conviction, I sat in Caroline's old study, now my study, reviewing the final reports that would close this chapter of my life forever. The mahogany desk where she'd spent countless hours documenting Richard's crimes now held documents that proved justice had been served completely. Patricia knocked and entered with a stack of legal papers and a smile I'd rarely seen from her. Maya, the federal prosecutors just called. Marcus Torres was sentenced to 25 years for Dr. Peterson's murder. With Richard getting life without parole and Janet accepting her plea deal for 8 years, that's everyone. I leaned back in Caroline's leather chair, feeling a weight I carried for months finally lifting. What about the civil suits? Hartwell Industries settled for $12.3 million rather than face public trial. The Peterson family will receive $4 million from that settlement, plus his full research will be credited to his name when we publish the Alzheimer's breakthrough. Patricia set down the papers with satisfaction. David Chen's consulting fraud charges resulted in full restitution of $1.8 million, and he's been barred from pharmaceutical consulting permanently. Through the window, I could see the garden where Caroline used to tend her roses. The spring blooms were more vibrant than they'd been in years, like the house itself was healing from Richard's poisonous presence. There's one more thing, Patricia said, her voice gentler now. Your mother called. She wants to have dinner this weekend. Says the family is ready to apologize properly. My relationship with my family had been complicated since the truth emerged. Some, like my mother, had been genuinely horrified to learn how Richard had manipulated them against me. Others were still processing the reality that they'd ostracized an innocent person while embracing a murderer. But slowly, carefully, we were rebuilding trust. I'll call her tonight, I said. What's the final tally on recovered assets? Patricia consulted her tablet. Including the offshore accounts, fraudulent transfers, and civil settlements, we've recovered $47.2 million total. The company's valuation has increased 340% since you took control, largely due to restoring the Alzheimer's research program and eliminating Richard's corrupt practices. $47 million. Caroline's inheritance to me had been worth more than anyone imagined, not just the money, but the proof of her love and trust when everyone else had abandoned me. I pulled out the small brass key that had started everything, the key to safe deposit box 247 that my family had mocked as worthless. Now it sat on my desk as a reminder of how wrong people could be about what truly mattered. Patricia, I want to establish the Caroline Chen Memorial Research Foundation. $50 million in startup funding, focused on elder abuse prevention and pharmaceutical transparency. I met her surprised eyes. Richard stole from this family for years, but Caroline left me something more valuable than money. She left me the truth. As Patricia left to draft the foundation documents, I opened the last item from Caroline's safe deposit box, a sealed letter marked, "For Maya, when justice is done. My dearest Maya. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means you've proven yourself stronger than Richard ever imagined. You've shown the world that the family's black sheep was actually its white knight, asterisk. Asterisk, I never doubted you would find the courage to fight back. From the time you were small, you had something Richard lacked, a moral compass that couldn't be bought or broken. That's why he tried so hard to destroy you, and that's why I knew you'd be the one to stop him. Asterisk. Asterisk, the money, the company, the restored family relationships, those are just the beginning. Use what I've left you to build something better than Richard ever could have imagined. Make our name mean something worthy again. Asterisk. Asterisk, you were never the disappointment, Maya. You were always the hope. Asterisk. All my love. Aunt Caroline. Asterisk P.S. Check the final partition on the flash drive. Password, my Maya triumphs. There's one last gift waiting for you. Asterisk. I plugged in the flash drive with trembling fingers and entered the password. Inside the hidden partition was a single video file dated 3 days before Caroline's death. On screen, Caroline sat in the same study, looking directly into the camera with clear, determined eyes, not the confused, medicated woman Richard had described to everyone. Hello, my darling Maya, her recorded voice said. If you're watching this, it means you've defeated Richard and reclaimed everything he stole from us. I'm so proud of you. Caroline smiled, looking exactly as I remembered her before Richard's poisoning had begun taking its toll. Maya, you've always been my greatest success. Not because of what you've accomplished, but because of who you are. Richard could never understand that integrity isn't something you can inherit, it's something you choose every single day. The video continued for 20 minutes, Caroline sharing stories about my childhood, expressing her love, and explaining her final plan with perfect clarity. Proof that her mind had been sound, that her trust in me had been absolute, and that everything I'd fought for had been worth the battle. As Caroline's image faded from the screen, I looked around the study that now truly belonged to me. Tomorrow, I would announce the research foundation. Next week, I would break ground on a new facility dedicated to Dr. Peterson's Alzheimer's research. Next month, I would testify at Richard's appeals hearing to ensure he never hurt another family. But tonight, I would simply sit in Caroline's chair and remember the woman who had saved my life by trusting me with the truth. The black sheep had become the shepherd. And the family that had once dismissed me as worthless now owed their redemption to the girl they tried to destroy. Caroline's flash drive had contained more than evidence of crimes. It had contained proof of love stronger than betrayal, and trust more powerful than fear. That was the real inheritance she'd left me.